Well, let me just begin by thanking everybody for coming tonight. This is in a last year that's been pretty weird. We continue to just kind of keep marching forward. I'm going to let John introduce Christy in a minute. John's been for those who don't know, John's super active and is our conservation officer, and takes a lot of interest in all our rivers, Little Red, among others. This is the first of our first live interactive meeting, so it's kind of a big shift for us. I'll tell you that the next three, so this one's great, and then we think we have a great lineup that's going to go for at least the next 4 months. Next month we have Tim Flagler with Tightline Productions. If you don't know Tim is a nationally, internationally known for his video work for outdoors videos. A lot of the fly tying videos you see on our Fly of the Month are taken from Tim Flagler. And he's going to come and he's going to talk about what trout eat and flies to feed them. And so I think that's going to be a real interesting one. Again, that's going to be an interactive session. Next month we have Skip Morris. Skip is pretty well-known author. I guess he's got a couple of dozen fly fishing books out there, well-known fly tyer. You've read something, if you've been in the sport for any period of time, you've read something or seen something that Skip's been involved in. And then in April, we've arranged to have Bob Klauser. Bob really doesn't need a whole lot of introduction. Pennsylvania fly fisherman, has created the Klauser minnow, which has probably caught more different species than any other fly that's out there. So we're really excited about it. Our approach over the next few months we'll keep adding, but we're just kind of watching what goes on with COVID. And when we start thinking that we can pull people back together, we will. We're just not quite there yet, and so we'll just kind of keep adding them onto the back end in hopes that once we kind of feel like we can forecast coming back as a group, we will. The next, we are planning a fall fly fishing fair in October, but we'll continue to kind of assess where we are, but I think we're hoping to build with that, and I think we're hoping to host a film tour in conjunction with that. So subject to any questions anybody has for me, I'll turn it over to John and let him introduce Christy. But I'm happy to take any questions people might have.
Are we good to go? Hello?
Are you? I couldn't hear anything you were saying. If you were introducing me, sorry about that.
No, I can't. I can tell nobody can hear anything. Can you hear me, Tillman? I've got my mic on as far as I know. I see other people with okay, good. All right. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's always a little bit of a challenge on these types of deals to know if all the technology is working correctly. Well, it's my pleasure. And Christy, I want to welcome you to Arkansas Fly Fishers. We're really pleased to have you, and we thank you so much for you taking the time, especially on a crappy winter weather situation like we have. I don't know if Christy remembers, but I met her for the first time. It was at Heber Springs, and it was at a community center, and the Game and Fish Commission was having I guess they were meeting with guides and community members and interested people about the rewriting of the trout management plan for the Little Red River tailwater. And so that's where I got to hear her for the first time and pose some questions to her. And over the last several years, she's been extremely helpful to our club. And I think for those of you on the board know that, especially over the last couple of months in the low water situations that we've had on the Little Red, Christy's been very valuable and very helpful in making her very best efforts to get the Corps and Southwest Power to give us some water flow on the Little Red during the spawning period. And so we're grateful for that. But let me say this, for those that you do not know, Christy is the Trout Management Program Supervisor for the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission. She's a big deal, guys, she's a big deal. And so over the last several years, Arkansas Fly Fishers has worked to create opportunities for the club to react and interact with people from Arkansas Game and Fish. One of the things that we hope that Christy will cover tonight, and I don't know exactly what her plan is, but Arkansas Game and Fish, in conjunction with University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff, has entered into a study of the fishery on the Little Red River tailwater. And they're studying a whole group of things, but among those are spawning habitat, the spawning time frame, habitat locations, growth of trout, size of trout. I know they're doing creel studies and surveying the size and number of fish that are on the Little Red. And so we're just very excited to have Christy and hope that she will bring some beneficial information to members of the club. And at this time, Christy, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, sounds good. Well, I really appreciate y'all having me tonight. Sorry we couldn't do this in person, but with the weather outside and all the still restrictions going on with COVID, it's kind of nice for us all to be able to sit and stay safe and do everything from home. But I really appreciate you guys inviting me. You know, like John said, I've gotten to know several of your members over the last few years, and it's been real nice to get to chat with people and get to know them better. I don't know why it's the case that I hadn't really had a whole lot to do with the Arkansas fly fishers up till just a few years ago. I know our program has presented to you all in the past, but this is actually my first time in my over 11 years with the Game and Fish Commission that I've actually talked to your group. So happy to give you guys an overview of some of the big stuff we've got going on right now. John kind of highlighted a few of the things I'm going to talk about tonight, but I think it's real good to be able to provide you guys with information. Anytime I can go talk to groups and put more stuff out there for people to know, it's really beneficial for us as well. So what I'm going to do now is share my screen. It's a PowerPoint presentation. If for some reason anybody's having trouble, I apologize, but we'll show my screen. I'm not sure if you'll still see me or not, or just my slides, but that's what's going to happen at this point. So we get that share. Okay, there we go. Okay, and if for some reason you're having trouble seeing this, anybody want to jump in and let me know you can see my first slide?
I got it.
Okay, great. So yeah, like I said, I'm just going to highlight some of the things, obviously on the Little Red. I know your members fish all over the state for trout fishing, but you have a particular fondness for the Little Red Gers Ferry tailwater. So most of my talk will be about that tonight. But the first thing I want to do, as I mentioned, it's been a while since our program presented to you guys, and that's to give you an introduction to my crew. These guys, Wes Sleeper and Joe Kaiser, my two assistant biologists in the program. And these guys have both been with Game and Fish now about 2 years. You may have seen them out on the river doing the actual work with the graduate student I'm going to talk about in a little bit, but both really great guys. I know Kyle Swallow had presented to your group, and he moved on to other things, and so these guys have come on board and just done a really, really great job. So you see them on the river, give them a shout out. And then we've also got our technician, Kent Coffey. He's been with our program over 15 years. He runs our stocking raft up here on the White River. But I have a really great crew. I can't brag on them enough, and I hope you guys get to meet them at some point in time. So just a real quick, for those who may or may not know, our program doesn't only deal with the big trout fisheries in North Arkansas. We are a statewide program, so we manage all of the trout fisheries in the state. The only ones we don't have a lot to do with are the family and community fishing program locations. They're scattered around the state. We've got an entire program dedicated to those, but we deal with major tailwater fisheries in Spring River, both in North Arkansas and in Southwest Arkansas. So that takes in the Narrows tailwater below Lake Greason, the Washita River tailwaters, 3 of those, all good locations people don't necessarily think about when they want to go trout fishing in the state. But we do manage fisheries all around, all over, which is good for us. It provides us with a lot of variety. And of course, we really enjoy that and working with people all over the state. So, of course, tonight I'm going to focus again on Greer's Ferry. And when I refer to that part that we manage for trout, I'm talking from Greer's Ferry Dam, 30 miles downstream to the 305 bridge. You can see on the map, it says end of trout waters. That's the Monaghan-Womack access at Highway 305 bridge. So that's the part of the river that we actively manage as far as stocking goes and doing our electrofishing samples. Of course, the UAPB, University of Arkansas Pine Bluff project I'm going to talk about tonight is focusing on this part of the river. But just so you know that I'm not including anything downstream of that part of the fishery. So John mentioned a few years ago, I met him at the management plan workshops. So the purpose of that was for us to go in and do a revisit of the very first plan we developed back in 2007 for the Little Red. At that point in time, management plans were pretty new, and we established our goals and objectives. So this revisit in 2016 was going back to the original plan and saying, what have we done? What do we still need to do? And then getting people's input on those fisheries. Of course, management plans started back in the mid-2000s with the first statewide trout management plan. And then, of course, the public workshops are really important for us to work in getting more public input. What do people want to see instead of us just doing what we think should be done? Because sometimes those things aren't always the same. So we try to find the middle ground and establish the goals, objectives, and strategies for our fisheries to manage those. And the fisheries that we manage are so uniquely different that what applies to one of our fisheries doesn't necessarily apply to another. So it's important for us to have the individual management plans. So I'm not going to go into all the details about the workshops and everything. Some of you were part of those. Some of you have seen other presentations about them. So I want to skip that kind of stuff. But just kind of real quick overview of the top concerns that we heard at those meetings in 2016. So one of the things was people interested in things related to the population, how many fish are out there, how many fish we stock, sizes of fish, catch rates of fish. That's how many fish people were catching themselves. Of course, there's always on the Little Red concerns about the spawning areas, especially for the brown trout. Lots of interest in cow shoals, catch and release area. After that meeting, we actually converted, as part of that management plan, we converted cow shoals from a seasonal catch and release area to a year-round catch and release area, and then actually converted a couple of the other catch and release areas from special regulations areas back to catch and release areas. So people obviously concerned about spawning, not only, big fish being caught in spawning areas, but when they spawn, where they spawn, all those sorts of things were of great interest. And, we really had really little information about those sorts of things other than knowing that the Little Red is the only place in the state where browns completely sustain themselves. Always there's talk about water quality. It doesn't matter which of our fisheries it is. Temperature things, things related to dissolved oxygen, flows are always a highlight when you talk about a trout fishery and what people perceive of it and are concerned about. And then enforcement's always something that gets brought up too, is people being concerned there's not enough enforcement, witnessing violations and ways to get around dealing with those. So tonight I'm going to focus on a few of these things in particular, just kind of give you a quick overview of what we've been up to since the management plan revisit. Again, it's tons of information and I can't get into everything, but I'll try to hit some of the top highlights. So the first thing I'll remind folks of is that stocking in the Little Red is kind of a cooperative effort. Stocking in Arkansas is a cooperative effort of multiple facilities, several federal hatcheries that raise trout for us. Of course, the majority of fish stocked in the Little Red and Greers Ferry are from the Greers Ferry National Fish Hatchery. Up until 2015, the Spring River State Hatchery, which is our fish hatchery, also stocked fish on the Little Red. Now, we had a virus detected in our state hatchery in 2015 that ended in the best interest of the Little Red. We were no longer able to stock fish from Spring River into the Little Red. The virus is one that it's infectious pancreatic necrosis. It's a fish virus that doesn't really affect the adult fish, but it does have more of an effect on juvenile fish. With the wild spawning fish in the Little Red, we didn't want to take any chances of spreading that virus into the Little Red and having it have any sort of a negative impact on the fish in the Little Red. So kind of just real quick, that's what's going on. So for the last 4 or 5 years, we've been stocking primarily from Greers Ferry Hatchery into there. So this graph I'm showing you now is an overview of trout stocking in the Little Red from 2007 to 2020. Again, 2007 was when we did our first management plan for the Little Red up through now, or this most recent year. The solid red bars are the numbers of rainbow trout we've stocked each year. Kind of the red striped bars are fingerling rainbow trout. Sometimes the federal hatcheries will have surpluses of the fish that they raise in small sizes, and they've got to find a home for those fish. So we've stocked fingerlings, as you can see, on multiple occasions over the years. We also stock brook trout. We don't do it every year. As part of the 2016 revisit, we decided to focus less on brook trout, except for in years where there were actually surplus fish available from the Greers Ferry hatchery. So, but we've been able to stock them for the last few years. And then the blue bar, you can see in 2019, we actually had the opportunity to stock cutthroat trout. The Norfolk hatchery had a surplus of cutthroat trout that year that were looking for a home. And I mentioned as one of the top concerns from folks in 2016 was catch rates and not catching enough fish. And so we've looked at ways to try and bump our numbers back up in the Little Red after the 2015 detection of the virus. So stocking fingerlings and then the brook trout and then the cutthroat in 2019 is a good way for us to supplement the total numbers that are stocked. So that you can see our total number of trout stocked the last couple of years is getting back up close to what it was prior to 2015. And some of those fingerling trout we've seen in our electrofishing samples have been surviving and looking really good, growing well, really nice fins. Some of you may have been catching those on the river. I got lots of questions about the fingerling fish and whether they were naturally spawned, but we have stocked quite a few 3 to 4 inch fish in the river the last couple of years. So if you're catching those, most likely they've come from these surplus stockings. And I will mention the cutthroat trout that we stocked in 2019. We hadn't stocked cutthroat trout. We discontinued those. We used to stock them prior to 2007, but the cutthroat trout in the Little Red just never did good at all. They didn't survive well. They didn't grow very well. So again, with the first management plan we did, we discontinued stocking cuts in the Little Red. So this 2019 stocking was sort of a test. We had them. We thought, why not try it, see what happens? And we haven't seen a single one of those fish since then. We haven't collected. We've been out sampling almost every season since middle of 2019, and we have not collected a single cutthroat trout the entire time. So I still don't think that those fish did very well. The other thing to point out, and you all know, and some of you definitely took part in the project, was last spring, the Bonneville egg planting project that was sponsored by the Little Red River Foundation. And we don't know yet if those fish actually hatched and survived. By the time we've done our electrofishing samples, those fish were probably still really small and hard to detect in an electrofishing sample. So the next year or two, we'll be able to tell whether or not those fish hatched, and they'll be very distinguishable from what we stocked in 2019. If for some reason there ends up being any survivors from that stocking, we'd be able to distinguish, but we just don't have any information on how successful that egg box planting was just yet. But I know it was an interesting project and people were really excited about it. We were excited to partner with folks on it. And I was actually there that day and helped bucket gravel, and it was a good project, brought lots of folks together. So we'll see what happens with that in the future. So one of the other big things we've got going on related to the fishery is we're currently doing a Creel Survey. That's where we go out and interview people while they're fishing and ask them questions about their trip. The last one we did was just, we were actually doing our last Creel Survey when we were having our public workshops in 2016. So it was 2015 and 16. And so when we did the workshops, we were missing some of the information we needed on what was going on from the angler side of things. How many fish people are catching, how many fish are being harvested, and current creel results are really important for us as managers. So another thing that we do for a creel, which this one started in September. It was supposed to start last March, but with all the onset of the COVID and not being sure about social distancing and how safe it was for staff to be out and how safe it was for staff to contract the public, we decided to put it off for a few months. So we finally got it going in September. I don't know if any of you have been interviewed. Abe Vogel is our Creel clerk down there. He's doing a really good job talking to folks and getting information from them. But another part of the survey, you can see I've got a couple of aerial shots here on the screen. We actually contract with a flight company to go out and count people while they're fishing. So that's how we get estimates of how many hours people are out there spending fishing. We count in different sections so we can compare how much effort, hours fished in different sections of the river. Helps us adjust our stocking numbers, helps us adjust when we stock fish. So it's really important information for us. And leading up to possibly revisiting this plan again within the next couple of years, having a more recent estimate of what's going on is really important. So some of the other stuff we get from creels, that's the types of tackle people are using. We take lengths and weights or lengths on the fish that people catch and keep, all the different types of tackle that people are using, how long they're fishing, where they're from, just all sorts of information about the fishery. So creels are a really, really important tool for us as fisheries managers, that we try to rotate around to our different fisheries. We almost always have one going on somewhere. It just happens that right now is where Gers Ferry is. And when it's all done, we'll know, how many fish have things improved since 2015-16. There were concerns about low catch rates and people not catching enough fish. So with that decrease in stocking numbers from this creel, we'll be able to tell whether or not catch rates have improved or stayed the same, or have they changed for the worse, which I hope not. But it's really, really important information for us. So the other thing John talked about in his introduction of me was our university study that we've got going on. University projects for the trout program are extremely, extremely important. This UAPB study is one of the first ones we've been able to do in a long time. But it was definitely something that was needed given all the interest about spawning down on the Little Red and our relative lack of information about what was going on. We have another project going on up here on the Bull Shoals and Norfolk tailwaters right now, where we've got a student from Missouri State who is doing a hooking mortality study. Some of you probably have heard people say, well, different types of tackle cause different amounts of fish to die, and you know, if you use this type of hook, it's worse or whatever. So we've actually got a student up here looking into which tackle types lead to the highest amounts of mortality. But so we're excited about this, but definitely our top project right now with the university is this spawning study down on the Little Red. So there's several different things we're trying to get out of this study. One of the things that the student in this previous slide in the blue shirt here on the right-hand side of your screen is Derek. He's our graduate student working on the project under his major professor. Derek's got several different things he's been doing for his portion of the project. He's going out for the last 2 falls doing red surveys. Of course, reds being the trout nest that they use for spawning. He's looking at when they spawn, where they spawn, looking at the red characteristics. So going in, taking different measurements on the reds, which I'll show you on the next slide. Of course, yeah, I said when and where the fish are making the reds. Where are the spawning locations on the Little Red? You know, we know of the major spawning areas like Cow Shoals and Winkley Shoals. Rainbow Island have historically kind of been some of the bigger spawning areas, but are there other places on the Little Red where fish are spawning that we don't really know about? And then getting a handle on that type of stuff. And then the other part of the project is a tagging part of the study where we're looking at the growth, survival, and movement of the fish, which I'll get into a little bit more. So the tailwater is split in, for the purpose of this study, is split into 3 different sections, sort of based off of the habitat that was in the different areas. So you've got the upper section in red on your screen. They kind of went out ahead of time and counted the number of potential spawning shoals in the different sections. So you can see by number, more shoals in the upper and the lower sections that could kind of be considered spawning shoals. And then 3 shoals in that kind of middle reach. Of course, the upper section goes from the dam down to just below Scrauncher Shoals, just not too far downstream from Barnett Bridge. And then the middle section goes from Scrauncher down to the top of the Mossy Shoal and the Mossy Catch and Release area. And then the rest of it is considered the lower section of the fishery, which these 3 sections you'll see why that's important in a couple slides. So I mentioned the red surveys. So from September through February, Derek is going out, and my guys, Wes and Joe, have been helping him out, going out every other week looking for reds. So every time they go out, when they find a new red, they mark it with a GPS unit. So when he comes back later, after the spawning season's over last season, he would come back to the reds that he found and take a whole bunch of measurements on them. He took the depth of the water. Of course, you can't do this at high water. It's got to be low flows. How fast is the flow moving over the reds? Dissolved oxygen, which is the DO on there. Takes water temperatures, of course, the lengths and widths of the reds. So getting all sorts of different information on reds themselves. And then looking at the types of substrate in the reds. So he's actually collected after spawning season. I can't stress that enough. He didn't go in while there were active eggs in the nest, but going back to these places after the reds are done, after the fish are done, and collecting substrate samples from each of the reds to see how big is the gravel size these fish are using for their spawning. So I don't have a lot of the data from the student. Of course, they're the ones that are handling all the data collection and data analysis, but I asked him to send me some information just as kind of a preliminary. I thought, a little bit of neat stuff to share with you all. So like I said, they're going out every couple weeks. This graph shows the number of new reds he found every 2 weeks this year from October through February. Or in this most recent count just a couple weeks ago. So you can see kind of from about November 15th through the end of December, that was kind of the peak of the spawning season as far as new reds being constructed by the fish. You know, he, like I said, he's GPS location every single red. He's got a really super high-tech GPS unit that can basically, you know, tell within inches if it's a red he's seen before or not. So every couple weeks he's going out, getting these different estimates of fish. And you can see how many reds. Well, we were over 1,600 reds, new reds this season, which is a really high number, especially compared to last year. Last year was a little tougher. The flows were a little higher. In the spawning season, they weren't able to get out as much, but definitely there's some trends. It was a similar trend as far as when they found this. The peak was similar, being that mid-November to end of December being kind of the time when fish were building the most reds. But that's kind of information we didn't have in detail going into this study, and we really, really needed that information. So another thing is, again, yeah.
You have a couple of people that are trying to get in. I don't know if it's popping up on your screen or not.
Let me go back to my. Sorry about that. I just admitted. Let's see. Go back to my thing here. Okay. So hopefully they can get in now, Tillman. So, what is this? Okay. So I showed you the 2 week intervals. The other thing we're looking at is the number of reds in the different sections. I mentioned the upper, middle, lower sections of the screen. Hopefully that wasn't blocking you guys the whole time. You can see across the bottom of the screen, I've got the upper, middle, lower sections, and then blue was the number of reds by section in 2019-20 season. And then red is this season, where he started in September through the first 4 week interval that he had summarized so far. You can see by far this season, and even last year, that the highest number of reds we found was in that upper section of the river. Again, that's from the dam down to Scruncher. Lots of really good spawning substrate up in those areas. The middle section, with very few shoals, doesn't have and hasn't had very many reds on it either season. This season, I think they've only found a total of 7 reds in the middle section of the river. So big differences. I asked Derek what he thought that was a result of, and he said even the shoals in the middle section that people can use that the fish could use for spawning, the substrate size is too big. It's not the ideal size that a trout would typically use for spawning. So it's not that surprising that we're not seeing as many fish in that middle section building reds. And then of course the lower section's got some good shoals, and they found quite a bit. But by far, so they've seen the most reds in that upper section, which is really, really interesting information. And the kind of stuff that we need to find out. I mean, for us, people are constantly asking us questions about, which shoals should be protected and when they should be protected. And that's the kind of information we're going to get out of the study is, knowing when the fish spawn, where the most fish are spawning, and then using that information instead of just relying on comments here and there from people about what we should do. And now we'll have data that can actually back up what would be the best management move for us. Some of the other just real quick things that we're getting out of that project, they're doing a sonar imaging where they're going out and taking these depth profiles of the river. That helps, that can help us quantify like how many areas of the river actually, could be serving as spawning shoals. They're doing side scan sonar stuff where they're, they can, and this is stuff that our trout habitat program, our other agency kind of partner program does as well. And this is not Derek's stuff, but just a general overview of the kinds of stuff that he is doing for his project. Going out and looking at different structures, how much in-stream habitat is there in different parts of the river. He's done this from top to bottom. And then you can use the side scan to go in and outline different types of substrate size. So you'll know how much percent gravel there is and how much percent cobble, a little bigger substrate, and I think that's really important for us. Again, tells us how much actual habitat is available throughout the river for these fish to use, which is a really cool thing. This will be serving as a really good baseline for projects on our other trout fisheries. So we're excited about that as well, but lots of really good information. The other thing John mentioned is that we get information about growth and survival and movement of our brown trout from this study. So every season we're going out. We started this in October 2018 was the first season that we tagged fish for this study. We tag every brown trout that we collect, and seasonally may seem like too much to some people. We've gotten comments that it's bad for the fish and we shouldn't be out there that often. And, we're really, really careful with handling the fish when we're out there. We do occasionally have a fish die here and there. Unfortunately, it's something that does happen, but overall, the majority of fish handle really well. Some people have been out with us. They see how gentle we treat the fish. So, it's something that we really try to take into consideration. But what we're doing seasonally is putting these pit tags in the fish. Pit tag is a passive integrated transponder, and you can see it on the left-hand side of your screen. It's that little glass capsule we inject just below the dorsal fin. We'll also cut off the fish's adipose fin. That's the little fatty fin that's behind the dorsal fin on the trout. So that way, when we go out the next season and recapture fish, if it's missing an adipose fin, we can scan it for a tag, and we'll know how much that fish has grown since the last time we saw it. Of course, we'll know how long it's lived since we tagged it. We can also use it to look at how far the fish has moved. The scanning receiver that we use actually logs a GPS location every time we scan a fish. So we know where the fish was tagged, how far it's moved. And that's another big part of this study is seeing, how far fish are moving in between spawning locations. Is there certain times of the year where they're moving more than others, which is why we're doing this seasonally. If we just went out once a year, twice a year, we wouldn't necessarily catch any seasonal movement related to spawning. So it's important for us to be out there seasonally and get that kind of information. And then, of course, they can use all that data that they collect on numbers from time to time to make sure or see how many fish are actually out there. We can get an estimate of our population size. Now, we are focusing this whole study on brown trout. I mean, brown trout are kind of the premier thing. Again, I mentioned earlier, they're the only fishery in the state we have entirely wild population. We do have a little bit of spawning of rainbow trout on the Little Red. We see young rainbow trout when we do our electrofishing samples of Collins Creek. If you are not familiar, Collins Creek is the tributary that comes through at JFK Park and dumps into the Little Red, but it's a really good nursery habitat. So we do see some spawning of rainbows, but there's not a very likely chance that they would ever sustain themselves completely. So we focus this project entirely on brown trout. Not say that we would never look at rainbows in the future, but we just, for now, we're focusing, browns are kind of the things people are most concerned about from a spawning standpoint. So that's why we focus this project on them. So the other thing to bring up tonight, which was a big deal this past summer, and John did really good giving an overview of what I was going to talk about tonight, is that we deal with, like I mentioned earlier, we deal with dams all over the state. And so working on all these different dams, there's a big relationship, obviously from a water management and hydropower standpoint. It's a big balancing act between all of the different projects, not only in Arkansas, but across this region of the U.S. Of course, we have the key partners from a federal standpoint. The Corps of Engineers is a huge partner for us. Southwest Power Administration, and of course, USGS. They're all really important in their own way when it comes to dealing with the trout fisheries. We work with them all the time on different issues, but this past summer we had quite a bit of interaction with them, more than usual. So one thing we do as a program, which I don't think a lot of people realize, is that we spend a lot of time, especially at critical times of the year, starting in the summer when the temperatures start warming up, actually keeping an eye on flow stuff, temperature, dissolved oxygen readings. I'll talk about the picture in the lower left in a second, but we're constantly keeping an eye on those things. And I see people, I'll see posts on Facebook or other social media that talking about temperatures getting warm, and people emailing me and letting me know. And I'll just say that we're constantly watching those things. The Corps folks, in critical periods, I'm in constant communication with them. If I think things are looking a little sketchy, then we'll start working with them. So one example of that was this past September. We had a whole series of days where the water temperatures from, say, about Lobo down to 305 were getting really warm. When I talk warm, I'm saying 70 plus degrees Fahrenheit, which we start getting really concerned about the fishery around 75. 70 is not a critical level where I'm worried that fish are just going to start dying left and right, but it definitely warrants starting to really take notice and pay attention to what's going on. But we got lots of calls and comments that fish were going to die and it was going to be a huge disaster. And we didn't end up having any major issues this past summer. We were able to work with Southwest Power really, really well. They didn't have the demand for power that required them to run water at the Little Red all the time. But we asked them for a fish water release, and a fish water release is basically just a gentleman's agreement, little slug of water for a couple of hours that helps cool the temperatures downstream. And we had a lot of back and forth. They ran a little bit of water and it wasn't enough to cool the temps. So I went back to them again the next day and said, we need more than that. And that happened for 2 or 3 days until finally we got it to a point where they ran water long enough and of high enough volume that it actually cooled the temps. Then every few days they were able to do these flushing flows, to kind of keep the temperatures down in the lower extents. But we didn't see any negatives to the fishery itself from that standpoint. Some folks were concerned, like I said, that we were going to have a fish kill. My guys went out, floated the river. They didn't see anything abnormal. You can go out any day of the week and see a couple dead fish here and there. So it's not anything where we had a massive fish kill. And we were really appreciative of Southwest being very accommodating at that time and working with us on that whole issue. So it was really, really, an extreme circumstance. Now, since that, the picture on the lower left, that's actually a picture that John sent me a couple months ago, which is a different thing related to the flows. So this time of year, we've got lots of comments this winter because there hasn't been a whole lot of generation. Of course, temperature is not an issue this time of year, but folks have been concerned about a lack of flow related to the spawn. And the only times I'm really that super concerned about a lack of flow is following a rain event. So you can see that picture in the lower left. The water's super turbid, lots of suspended sediments in the water. In circumstances like that, I will actually ask them, them being Southwest Power again, for a flushing flow, which is releasing water kind of like we did in the summer, but this is for the purpose of clearing out that turbidity. And this time of year, that's important because we don't want those that sediment settling out and smothering any of the reds. So it's not unusual for us this time of year to request following a rain event that they flush the water out. So if you ever see anything like this, you know, they haven't run any water for a couple days after a big rain where the water turns to chocolate milk, just feel free to email me and let me know. Really, if there's any issues with the fishery, temperature wise, or, you know, sediment like this picture, you know, my advice for you members of the Arkansas Fly Fishers is that you call me or email me and let me know. Like I said, we keep an eye on things, but we're not there on the ground every day like other folks are. So sometimes it helps to get notified. The thing that we have run into with the invention of social media is actually finding out about these kinds of issues on social media and not knowing that they were happening, where we could have responded more quickly if we had had more notice that something was going on. So call us first, please, and then put it on social media. It would help us a lot more. Let's see. So the last thing I want to mention, and this is important for me to bring up in any presentation I do, is that anglers are the best way that we can help stop spreading invasive species in our state. They cause a lot of issues in lots of different ways, but I just want to throw out that we do have some of these invasive species in some of our trout waters. You may travel back and forth to the different trout fisheries. Always important for you guys, consider clean, drain, dry your equipment before you go from place to place. We have lots of advice about how to properly do that stuff on our website. Of course, we're doing our part by telling you folks about it, putting signs up at different access areas, but it's really important. Some of you may be familiar with the fact that we just, as an agency, implemented a regulation that you have to have the boat plug in your boat removed before you leave a water body. And that's one way for our agency to help stop the spread of invasive species from one place to another. That's a new regulation, just a few weeks old, as of, the 1st of February or 1st of January, that a lot of people weren't really familiar with. So just heads up, if you do have a boat, you have to take your plug out before you leave the access now. And that's just our way of trying to stop the spread. One sort of new thing related to this that's popped up in the last couple of years since we talked to your group is we've actually found the invasive northern snakehead in the Little Red. A couple of them were collected just not too far below Barnett Bridge last year in the summer. It looks a lot like a native bowfin, or grinnell, as some people call them, but it is an invasive species. So we ask that if you find one, kill it. It's illegal to transport these fish alive. Please notify our program if you find it. The phone numbers are at the bottom of the screen. And then some people say you should eat them because I guess they're really good fish people like to eat. But that would be a really good way for you all to share information with us as well. If you happen to see these fish or suspect you've seen one in the Little Red, it'll help us get an idea of where they might be moving within the fishery. So I can't, do any talk without just throwing out there how many different agencies we work with across the state and different clubs and organizations that, help us achieve our goals and strategies in our management plan. We're really appreciative. We appreciate our partnership with you all. And if you have any questions now, I'm happy to take them. I'm going to go back to the screen with the videos here. Okay.
Well, I'll start because there have been a couple that have popped up in the chat box while you were going. And
Okay.
one was asking for some information about the mortality protocol and how that works. I think when you were talking about the study that's going on with the hooking, and the other question was asking whether the image that's, I presume it meant the sonar images will become available at some point.
Yeah, I don't. So the question was about the hooking mortality study up here on the White Norfolk. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's right. And if they want to come online, they can. But it just said, how does the mortality protocol work?
Yeah. So what that student is doing is, and he's got it pretty good, is he's actually going out on the river using different types of tackle and fishing for trout with different types of tackle, which that's any student's dream project, I think. But they're using, I can't remember the exact types. Some of you may have participated in a little survey we did not too long ago where we asked people, what is, if you're going to fish with any type of tackle, what's it going to be? Kind of help us narrow down what we were going to use. So he's, one of the components of it is a baited, barbed baited hook versus unbaited hook. One of them is, I think, a treble hook versus a single hooking point with barbs. Like, just so there's several different categories. And I apologize, I can't remember off the top of my head, but going out, so they catch the fish, they immediately take those fish to a holding pen at a dock, put them in a holding pen, and then leave them there for a week, I think. Then they go back and count how many, they're tagging the fish so they know which fish was caught with which type of lure. They're recording all sorts of stuff like landing time and handling time and where it was caught, if it was foul hooked, hooked in the side of the face, or how much it bled. And then they can see how many fish are dying from these different types of tackle. And so, again, one of the things people ask us all the time is, or tell us all the time rather, is you need to restrict this thing, you need to restrict that thing, and we don't have the data to back up. On a trout, on a trout fishery, we just don't know what are the ones that, and so far, I think, I don't know, and I may be completely off, but last I heard, there really isn't that high mortality differences between the different tackle types that he's seen so far. The biggest source of mortality he had was an otter getting into one of the holding pens and eating every single fish in the pen, which meant he had to redo that part of his project. But one of the things you learn is, the otters taught him a valuable lesson about how tightly you need to latch the lid on your project. But that's kind of the stuff we're getting out of that study. With regard to the sonar images, I think maybe they'll make those available. Again, we're not the ones collecting it's our data, but I don't know when that would be available. But like we use different types of images like that for the lake fishery. So I just don't know the answer to that at this point in time.
Fair enough. I know a number of our guys would like to have that college kids project.
Right.
Some of them can't catch enough fish to make that a project.
Yeah, I actually, as a grad student, had the luck of having that type of, one component of my project was actually fishing for sauger on the Tennessee River, catching the fish, putting transmitters on them, and throwing them back in the river. So fishing for my master's is something I got to do a little bit of. So it's definitely a fun project. Important, but fun still. Any other questions?
I do. Christy, this is John. Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. So if you could you just make a general comment? I mean, maybe you don't have the numbers in front of you, but just a general comment, say over the last couple of years, what you guys are seeing as far as the brown trout that are recaught, like y'all caught them this year and you caught them the year before or maybe the year before, what growth rates, if any, you're seeing on them? I think that's something that's important to the membership.
Yeah, we actually I don't have any information on actual growth rates just yet. Previous study we did, a tagging study we did ourselves on the Little Red back in 2013. Growth rates were poor. You know, an annual growth rate of maybe 1 to 2 inches a year, compared with, say, Norfolk tailwater, where a brown trout was growing in the first couple of years of its life, growing 5 to 6 inches per year. But we see that in the previous study, we saw that the brown trout, once they got up to about 13, 14 inches, growth rates really slowed down. Now, whether this current study will show that or not, I don't know. But the university will be putting that information together. Now, with regards to recaptures, so like I said, we're going out there seasonally, tagging fish, going back the next season. And I'd say it's been pretty consistent. It's 30 to 35% of the fish we catch each season are fish that we've tagged previously. So each season we're getting, 65, 70% new brown trout that we've never seen before in our project. So, and we've actually collected a few fish from the 2013 study while we've been out electrofishing for this UAPB project. So some of those browns have showed, potential to survive, 6, 7, 8 years, which is pretty neat. And the reason we love doing pit tagging is the pit tags have a unique individual ID that, it's like a pet chip that you would put in a fish, or, that you would put in your pet. You scan it, exactly who it is, where it came from. No doubt, who's who with those tags, which we really like.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I have another question in the chat box asking about tiger trout on the white and whether we'd ever see those on the Little Red.
Well, it's funny you say that. We've actually seen tiger trout several times on the Little Red, because we've had natural reproduction of both brown trout and brook trout on the Little Red. We've actually seen wild tiger trout a couple of times. I haven't seen them myself down there. I say we as a program, as an agency, has documented tiger trout. But yeah, we started, for those who don't know, tiger trout are a hybrid between a brown trout and a brook trout. We did an experimental stocking of those in Bull Shoals catch and release area last year in May. Big success, really popular. They're not able to naturally reproduce. So what we hope with these fish is that they will, because they're the hybrids, we hope that they will put their energy towards growing as opposed to putting energy towards reproducing, and that we'll see some big size. In other states where they've stocked them, they've gotten really, they've got the growth potential of a brown trout, but they've got the fight of a brook. So we're going to try it one more time up here on the white this year. We've got some more brewing in the hatchery right now that'll go in this summer. And we're just in the experimental stages right now. Can we get them to survive? And if they do survive, how well are they going to do? And, well, I don't know if we would stock those down on the Little Red or not. Like I said, with so much natural reproduction down there, and we see wild ones, we would never be able to tell if they were stocked or something that was a product of the river itself. I won't say no 100%. I just don't know. First, we got to see how well they do on the white, if it's even worth continuing on to do it up here. But so far, they've been really popular. People really like them. Very excited about them. So a fun, diverse opportunity to try out.
And I'm getting texts too, asking questions.
I'm sorry, what's that?
But I guess people are living vicariously through me. I'm getting text on the side too, asking questions. One of the questions I've got is the brown trout seem to spawn pretty well, but the rainbows don't. And why is that? Like, why does
I don't know. You know, I don't know. That's the magical question I had an answer to. We get questions all the time from people about, you know, why the browns do better than the rainbows, especially on the little, I mean, if they're so successful on the little red with spawning, why can't the rainbows do better on the little red than anywhere else in the state too? We do see a little bit of natural reproduction on the white, but it's so weird because, you know, we've typically always had the impression that rainbow trout were spring spawners, which typically in our fisheries, at least it's been the case the last 10 years, is that the high water typically comes in the spring. So I don't know if that has an impact on how much that has an impact on rainbow trout spawning, but plenty of people have gone out this past fall and there were lots of rainbows that looked like they were about ready to spawn, you know, eggs coming out, milk. And so, you know, I don't know if the time frame is different for little red trout or just rainbow trout in general, you know, from what they are naturally in the wild because of this tailwater environment where we don't have huge fluctuations and usually don't have huge fluctuations in water temperature that would cue spawning activities. But I really don't have the answer to it. I wish I did. Like I said, this brown trout study is a good start, but we hope maybe in the future we get more university studies focused on these types of questions that we just don't have the manpower to answer ourselves.
Thank you. Another question in the jack box is been multiple dead brown trout 14 inches plus cow shoals this year.
Hey, Tony, your mic's kind of funky. I don't know what's going on. Does everybody else have that issue with hearing him?
Yes, nobody can hear it.
Let me try to get it better.
You say it's in the chat box?
Yeah, let me turn off anything that'll help. The question was about dead brown trout 14 plus.
Oh.
All right, so
is there any consideration of closing cow shoals during spawn?
yeah, I pulled up the chat box so I could see what the question was. I don't know. Part of this study is for us to answer that question. You know, cow shoals has always been kind of the premier spot where people see, you know, it's one of the most accessible for people to wade in this time of year to look at the, you know, see fish during the spawning season. One of the things we don't want to do as an agency is to take away people's opportunities without getting the answers to the questions like, you know, I don't know how many multiple is, you know, if that's a few or if that's 100. You know, we just don't want to close it until this, you know, or even take that into consideration until after the study's over and we have more information about how many fish are out, you know, how many fish are using cow shoals compared to other areas. And we just need to get more information before we can start really talking about closing one of the most popular places on the whole river. And we've done surveys where not everybody's in favor of closing cow shoals. So we need more information before we can do that. And I see after that question from Cody about possibly incorporating drones into the UAPB study, and the answer is yes. They've actually gone out with our drone, with our folks who operate drones to look to see if you could use a drone to look and survey the reds. We wouldn't be able to get any of the very specific things, but our guys are not, when they're out doing their surveys, they're being really, really cautious about where they're walking. You know, they're not walking through the reds, stomping all over the place. But We have actually gone out. They did a test flight just a couple months ago with a drone to see if you could do red counts from the air, which if we can, and it's a reliable way of doing it, it'd be a great thing for us to use on our other trout fisheries as well. So, Cody, the answer is yes. Richard, do you have a question?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for the presentation. It's really been good, very informative, and I really appreciate Game and Fish using the science to inform their decisions. And well, I just wanted to go back to the UAPB study, and you're talking about the kind of the spatial temporal distribution of these reds, and it's kind of once you kind of get there, what are there next steps that you're looking at? I mean, it kind of goes to some of the things that you just talked about, and how successful are the reds, and if they're highly successful, then closure may be an option, or maybe not. But so is it kind of what are the next steps of those studies? Where is it going to lead you as far as looking at success or distribution of of the fish after they spawn?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one of the big things, like I just mentioned, is using this. Once we know when and where are the most popular areas, I think it's going to be helpful for us to stop all of the you need to close this, you need to close this, you need to close this, because it's too often that we just didn't have that information to be able to make those decisions. So now if we have people come to us, it's telling us, well, what about this area? We can say, well, actually, during the study, we didn't really see that much activity compared to other areas. So it'll be really interesting what it all shakes out to be at the end. I don't know if there's a next phase as far as, what we would do from a spawning study standpoint. Another thing I want to look at, which will kind of maybe be phase 2, as I mentioned, the movement aspect, and kind of right now what we're looking at is big, large scale movements, trying to catch fish moving at certain times from point A to point B. So we want to take that movement information. I mean, the upper section's a big section in itself. So it could be, if they're just looking at, right now they're looking at movement between section 1, section 2, section 3, upper, middle, lower. But you could have fish going from, say, John's Pocket up to Beach Island and then back down, or that, wherever they might be moving within upper section that we would not, that's not being taken into account. So one idea I have is to get with UAPB to look at more fine scale movements, and actually maybe putting out radio transmitters where we would have receivers set up along the river, go out and put a radio transmitter in the fish that would be constantly monitoring individual fish moving up and down the river, have a student going out there tracking, getting some bigger movement information. Lots of talk about possibly fish moving from below 305 bridge up into the main part of the fishery and then back down, or vice versa. And we just don't really know a lot about what's going on in the lower part of the Little Red, below what we actively manage. So getting more information about that will be important for us moving forward.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Well, I appreciate you all having me tonight. Anytime if you guys have any more questions, feel free to email me or call me anytime. My door's always open. I'm happy to talk to anybody. So.
Well, thank you. I can tell you, one of the big takeaways is I hope people will continue to kind of communicate, and, I know John and I are both happy to kind of act as an intermediary. If you got questions or want to aggregate from the club to Christy, that's great, or obviously reach out to her directly. One of the other things that I think I'd just like to point out is, several years ago, and there hadn't been that many, 3, maybe 2 or 3, this was one of the reasons that AFF was such a big proponent of the license price increase. Part of that went to go refurbish the Spring River hatchery, but a lot of it was to begin to build up a base of finances available for these kinds of studies, because our biologists have just year after year really not had the kind of data to make decisions, because the data cost money and we weren't investing in the fishery. So I'm excited, because I think this is probably the beginning of seeing a different kind of understanding of what makes our rivers healthy and productive. That we've basically been fighting on empirical data or word of mouth for decades. So we appreciate it, and we appreciate the openness. We appreciate the communication. One of the things I encourage you to do is go to the Game and Fish, the fishery site. You can actually sign up for email communications on a whole variety of warm water and cold water fisheries around the state. So if you're interested in particular what's going on in Little Red, there's actually an email address serve, emails that come out specific and tailored to the waters you're interested in. So if you don't want to listen about farm ponds up in southwest Arkansas, that's great. You don't have to get them. But if you want to know about the warm water fisheries around here or hot springs, there's each district kind of has it, plus the cold water fishery. So there is Game and Fish has really gone out of its way to really put a lot of information out there to make the sport accessible and kind of understanding of how they're guiding those decisions. And so I want to say that so people hear it, but I also want to say it so that you get the positive feedback of how much we appreciate taking the time to communicate with everybody what you're seeing and how you're thinking about it.
Yep, it's a really good resource that our folks in Little Rock started, and a great way to get information out. Good way to keep folks updated on different, like you said, not only trout fisheries, but all the other types of fisheries across the state. It's really easy to find on our website. Just go to the fishing section of our website, and right above the when you click into that page, it'll have a sign up link, and you can go sign up there. It's easy. I appreciate y'all having me. Thanks a bunch. I look forward to the next time.
Thank you. John, do you have anything?
I do not, Christy. We appreciate your help and time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Y'all have a good night.